happy to having you here. So we are going
Thank you for inviting us.
yes,
Yeah, happy
and
to be
I would
here.
like to share for both of you just because of this, and you've been involved in a series of production unit and special insiders coming up with the English edition of the book to trace a bit some aspects and specifically to focus on language and translation. Instead of that, I would like to first maybe start with Olivera as someone then we actually offer the possibilities and how was actually from your side of, and points of view looks on the very beginning, and then through this process when we start to exchange with Boris, how come up some kind of new volume and some representation of new explosion of meanings and specifically some values of the language what we produce in the new multimodal edition.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for including me in the process from very early on. Not to say that I feel like I included myself, or I suggested that I be included because you introduced me to the book, which I didn't know about. Although you told me that this was your sort of most popular publication, and that it was especially popular among the diaspora, of which I am one member of sorts. I read the book and I liked it, and I sort of gave it to other people to read who all thought it kind of made perfect sense, or it worked for them in its original language. And also, as I read it from my sort of position as a person who now reads mostly in English and has had most of the sort of reading education and formal academic contexts and life in English in the past almost 30 years, I thought that the book kind of made sense to me in my English speaking mind, and I thought it should appear in English or some version of it, in the sense that it provided a different kind of language and a different kind of perspective on not just on the historiography of Yugoslavia and on ideas about film theory and film historiography, but also on the idea that whatever happened in now former Yugoslavia had something to do with a sui generis kind of ancient hatred, local feelings, or inexplicable conundrums of mentality or history that is somehow impenetrable. That it was sort of a conversation about what it would be like to think about what happened there and what kinds of documentation we have for this in terms of the art that was made there and art by people who can talk about their art and have talked about their art, and sort of what kind of landscape we get when we ask those people to reflect on the work that they have done, what that work has been, that it's been labeled avant-garde, but also amateur, that was kind of a particular perspective on what it means to make art in those circumstances, and that Boris's framing of those interviews and all the essays about how the reading can be done of history and of the past and what uses past has politically and sort of socially, culturally. that all sounded to me like an amazing opportunity to have that kind of conversation available in the Anglophone world, not just in North America, where such a conversation is very hard to have, especially when the subject is the collapse of socialism, or what used to be the socialist states. But I would say anywhere in the world, which is everywhere, where English has become sort of the lingua franca of discussions about historiography, any kind of academic discussion, the language of education, the language you and diplomacy, political history, especially. So I'm going to stop here for now.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned several topics when we could actually go to deeper into it. But I would first of all, then I would like to share with Boris then, and to remind him in some aspects. Then from the very beginning, when we start to work on the first book in Subocreation, we dreamed to make it, and we understood from the very beginning. Then the conversation in between Zhilnik and him, it's taking a very strong self-referent, categories, sharing the same knowledge and past of Yugoslavia and some circumstances, which was clearly known to in between two of them. But then we understood that if we are going to transmit into wider public, we have to work kind of a new book. So we call it kind of colloquially in between us, like we have to make it a new book. So, but a lot of different circumstances happened. So nevertheless, the new book never happened. And then we actually start to think, and just because of this, then I mentioned to you, then the book was actually a very big success. I offered to you then you could actually go through it. And then it was also a big question mark how the book itself resonate in this kind of deep social resignation of in total, in the globally, parts. And then I was really happy when you actually turn back to us and then to say that it's really strong value still, then we could actually go through it. And then and from that point, we actually start to think about these multimodal aspects. What will be the other components that could be covered in the cortex of a new edition? So that was actually the starting point. Okay, let's go to another process. So in this stage, it's actually comes now back to Boris. Then how it looks then when he appear with a new issue, actually new block of translated texts, and how was provoke him to react on it.
Or what it means to translate a thing like this.
Yes. Probably you remember I was not only skeptical about the possibility to do it, I was hesitating, procrastinating, because of course I was scared of a failure, because you can fail in translation. You can fail. Translation, of course, you say it's a new book. Every translation is a new book. It's to put forward the definition for us, working definition of translation. Translation is a repeating that creates difference. And it was all about this difference. We can repeat something, but how to produce a difference which will make sense. This is one thing. And then another moment of my skepticism is my experience with I would call it not simply Anglo-Saxon in terms of language, but Western, generally. Western understanding of both of historical term called the collapse of communism, one thing, And another thing, the location, cultural location of this event, historical, which is the East, you know. So both the collapse of communism as an event and the place where it takes place, well, somewhere else in another time. You know, when I say not only somewhere else in the East, not in the West, but in another time in terms of, you know, belated, the idea that the fall of communism was a catching up with the missed development, so that we were in a lag, that we were actually outside of the history and precisely by the historical, so to say, you know, but in need to catch up. So that it was all about catching up, all about repeating, all about, you know, cooking while the West provides recipes, you know, and so everything was clear. And how to, you know, this is the main source of my skepticism, how to deal with this, because it's deeply ideological, and it is colonial. It is a form of let me, you know, when you have such a cultural issue, which is okay, you are filmmaking in a former communist Yugoslavia, you know, and then if you go outside of the discipline called film theory, so you are not going to address those who deal explicitly with film theory, but a wider audience, then you must deal with this problem. You must face, you know, you are in a weaker position, which is not simply that our mother tongue nobody understands in the world. That we, if we want to think, if we want to be a thinking being, we have to use other languages. Today it looks like simply it's always English. I'm a bit older. For me, it meant I studied philosophy first German, you know, and then English. But anyway, we have a different experience. You know, monolingualism is not the way we think, but it was not the way also for the filmmaker Želimir Žilnik, for the idea of his filmmaking, for the idea of historical reality. He was both imagining, co-imagining, and representing and producing. He's a producer of history, you know. It's not a historical discourse. We are going now to tell what it was in terms of, you know, let's collect the fact and then present it to the West, you know, so that they get, so that we serve as a so-called native informants. We provide some sort of raw material of facts, and then they will understand whether it makes sense, is useful for a film theory, for film history, or for the so-called knowledges produced by the area studies. You know, area studies, this is the idea that you have an area, regardless how we call it. We call it the Balkans, you know, former Yugoslavia. We might, you know, we call it the region, but it is the idea that there is a knowledge that covers the region. Of course, you know, there is no the other direction in terms of, let's say, we in our language, we have area studies on the United States. You know, when something happens in Norway, when a terrorist, local terrorist, kills 50 people, you know, terrorism, Western European violence, dramatic, comparable only to ISIS, you know? And when you have this event, nobody called from London, from New York to, I don't know, to Niš or to some, you know, to Tuzla, where there is, those institutes are not based in the capitals, you know? They are based in Austria, in Graz, in Germany, in Regensburg, it's not Berlin, it's not Vienna. So just imagine they would call someone Institute for Western European Studies, Department for Northern Europe in Nice, University of Nice. Please explain to us why these Norwegians are killing each other. Is it part of their culture, or what is going on? And then he or she would provide, knowledge.
Yeah, expertise.
So this was for me also. This is the trap, Yes, we want to do something, to say something, to produce a book, but not, to throw it on the pile of so-called knowledge, area studies knowledge. Oh yes, now it will be very useful for the PhD candidates in the United States who write about the Balkans.
Yeah, which is one reason that I really liked the book. As Kanye West would say, I'm going to let you finish. I was going to say, I think this is a great moment to have this book in particular appear in English, because there's a surge of, there's sort of a rediscovery of socialism in the aftermath of the 2016 election in the United States, not just because of the victory of Donald Trump, but because that was the defeat of Hillary Clinton, which is a particular kind of a defeat, and her victory over Bernie Sanders, who had galvanized a lot of young people who now are occupying very prominent positions in alternative media. And there's a huge sort of resurgence of a language of socialism or interest in the history of communism and socialist states. And I'm going to say more later, but I think this is a good moment to intervene in that kind of conversation by introducing a sort of a body of language that is a book, to sort of speak to that surge of interest and the place of various people who have academically been interested in this for a while, who are at American institutions. And I know for a fact that many academic libraries are going to order this because you can teach from this book very nicely. And also that the classes that will sort of convene around this book will look very differently from the classes that would have been possible with a conventional theory book or history of the period of the region and the period. But speaking of area studies, which of course is the specialty of rich academic institutions in the United States as sort of allies of the US government and the State Department, where we had the conference on Jelly at Columbia at the Harriman Institute in the fall, as the war was already in its second month, I think. The building in which we were, the Institute, which is the Institute for something called International Studies, Area Studies, whatever, Central and Eastern Europe. We were there one weekend, and the following weekend we could see the posters. Hillary Clinton and David Miliband were going to have a seminar. And that's sort of the kind of business that's run out of area studies. Any wealthy university which has a good political science program, which in some places is still called government, like Harvard has the School of Government, was an ally in the creation of the Eastern mythology about Europe and anti-communism and all of that. So more about that later.
Thank you. Thank you. We are talking about the problem, The problem is, again, I'm repeating it, translation, also linguistic translation, is not, a linguistic practice facilitating communication between two different languages. You know, people don't understand each other, and then the translator arrives at the scene and makes understanding possible, and that's it. No, this is not. This is a challenge. You have a clash of temporalities, you have cultural clash, you have different histories, but the most important for me is a clash of temporalities. You know, in terms of that this book, this is the title, you know, it's about past, but what past? Which past? Whose past? Whose past? What is the past? And then it's not, again, a past of some other other place in the world, which might or might not be interested and useful for the hegemonic timeline. It is about, you know, crashing the temporal difference and creating something what we, you know, sharing, actively sharing one and the same temporality. We do live in one and the same world, and despite of all the differences, we address and claim common history, which is also common. You know, communism is the common history. Historical communism, feminism. You know, the failure 2016 of Hillary Clinton, which was, you know, the promise, the first, finally a woman, you know, on the top of the most powerful country in the world. You know, this was the dream. It was the wrong dream. The dream was wrong, you know. And then because, yes, you know, Nancy Fraser commented on this case. She was so closely connected to the you know, financial capital, to the Wall Street, and it is a different story. But our story, you know, speaking of feminism, I've heard that, I don't know, in Europe, they have planned to now in one of the countries, I forgot, it's not important, but it's interesting. You know, they dream about men and women having same wages for the same job. Now, 45, this was a moment in the constitution of former Yugoslavia. 45 constitution, men and women were, according to the constitution, guaranteed same wage for same jobs. So, I mean, what is the past? What is the future? Whose future? And these days, when you know, in Zagreb, in Croatia, the so-called pro-life marches, no, not LGBT. This is, yes, it also, we do have this, but pro-life marching, women, of course, not only, but women, they are directly supported from the United States. So this is, it's the whole situation is much more complicated, and the learning, but also, you know, sort of de-learning is needed. De-learning is needed, and if there is some sort of an ideal, you know, about this book, is to make this book a source for knowledge, but a shared knowledge, a source of a performative knowledge that will bring us together in a sort of you know, common experience of history. And so it's a huge Olivera, it's a huge task, and I must say that I'm constantly speaking of my skepticism, because I know how difficult it is. But I was so happy that, you know, when I first read the interventions of Oliveira, then I got this feeling, it might be possible. It might work. This was this, and this is the moment. This is the it's not, I don't know, Oliveira, whether you are such an expert in English language, but you are expert in working in collective production of sense, of meaning, of what I'm saying, sharing of experience. And this is what the language is about. So when I first saw her intervention, I got this feeling, optimistic. Well, it might work. Let's do it. And then no, this is I'm myself a translator. I translated thousands of pages and huge books, and created terminologies, but in psychoanalysis, for instance. But I know how difficult it is, and I know how most of the translators actually rarely reflect critically about their own practice. They say, this is a target language, this is a sort language, let's do the job. No, it is much more problematic, difficult. But on the other side, people do things without knowing what they are doing. So often the production and the results are very, very good. But in our case, again, Oliveira, it is really was this working together was a productive experience for me.
Thank you. I was going to say, I don't know what kind of expert I am on the English language. I don't know that I'm an expert on anything, but I did spend, I have a PhD in English from a US institution, and whatever work I've done over the past, I don't know, 20 years has mostly been about history of historiography and sort of the ideas about sort of colonial consolidation in the 18th century, and ideas about what kinds of texts and reading should be made available for the general public to read in order to feel like they are in charge of an empire, and also sort of ideas about historiography of unrepresented people in English. And so when I read your book in its original language, I was kind of like, oh, I can hear what this language does in English. I think there's space to be made for this. So that's kind of what my preparation has been. I don't know if it's an expertise, but it's a sort of sense of what kinds of conversations exist in English about how to talk about the past, and especially the work of historians who have talked about very explicitly about how it never happened the way that historians put it. It's a form of writing. So we're kind of working with the writing and the documentation that we have, and here's a thing that I can put together that you can read. So in that sense, I was happy to sort of include this in that conversation about what kinds of pasts are possible, what can be imagined, what sorts of ideas about the more recent past are possible, especially in a place that's so fraught for so many people that the conversations are sort of stuck in English, and that whole political force field that you described is very much in place. But I was going to ask you what your sense is of the book as a kind of book that is in a way having a conversation with people who want to talk about nostalgia and who want to talk about socialism as a real possibility. a lot of the new language of socialism, or rediscovery of socialism, as I call it, in the US among younger people, is often about how the states were, in fact, sort of socialist states, that the failure of socialism was a failure of a certain kind of system or structure. And a lot of the book and a lot of these conversations make it clear that there's no nostalgia for Žilnik, that there's sort of that the art makers are the ones who are, in a way, better leftist than the leftist in power. That they are the ones, and that's why the art is important to look at, and his sort of ideas about art making and history making are more important than what happened to the political institutions. Do you have any sense of how that works?
I myself spent some time in the socialism, Yugoslav socialism, experienced both its dark sides, you know, also oppression, very concrete, because I was sort of, we call it dissident. I would not call myself dissident. Looking at how dissidents developed and who was dissident, you know, how many fascists were among dissidents. I don't want to be dissident, to be, but you know, at that time I could sell my identity as a, you know, dissident. This is one. On the other side. It was especially, you know, the 70s, late 70s and the 80s, time of extreme creativity and freedom. I'm saying this freedom of things which today seem impossible, you know, organizing like students' cultural centers, how they were working, how it was so easy to organize something which I think it would simply not be possible. We also, you know, I'm, you know, nostalgia. Nostalgia is a problematic for me because why? You know, I have this German experience with German philosophy. I'm in Berlin, and this is fantastic. The German language makes you, you know, makes it possible to understand certain concepts from a different perspective. Like, you know, we say experience, which is Erfahrung German. We cannot, in German, you can say Erfahrung machen, which would translated would be to make an experience, which experience, you have to do it, you know. You cannot simply experience something passively. You have to produce it, to work on it. And this is what makes sense for me. This is a contribution, this book, for such a making of an experience, historical experience. And historical experience, as you know, if it should be, you know, has a moment of truth, then it is complex, it is ambivalent, it is contradictory, it is full of what is called foreign, you know, which is not only foreign language, everything is foreign. It is foreign to say that women were, you know, in a better social positions in the socialist 50s than today. Despite, you know, the Western feminism, which did not in former Yugoslavia enter or after the collapse, but was already, you know, late 70s. We had international conferences. And the problem, anti-feminist policies, arrived 90s. You know, this is where you have, you know, suddenly feminists became witches chased by whom? Not by some patriarchal Balkan, but a pro-Western, market-oriented media, former feminist colleagues.
Return to the real values.
Yeah. So it is complicated. This is what is foreign to, and I'm repeating it, and this is what I also explicitly mentioned in the introduction. Translation is not about removing what is foreign, to make everything understandable, and everything easy accessible. The Humboldt, German philosopher, one of the first philosophers of the language, and at the same time the theorists of translation, not only German but in a much broader historical context. He claimed that a good translation is a translation that produces the foreign, because the foreign in a translation is when you can learn something, when your language, your culture gets something new. This is why the foreignness is something good in translation. So to put it very simple, I hope that our book is full of foreign, of the foreign, of the foreigners for the English reader. This phantom, I don't know, but this figure of the English reader, so that he or she can, improve English language experience, historical experience, knowledge on art, art making. This is what, it's not about making something easy. It's quite a contrary. It is inviting people to share the problems, because me as an author, we are not, the book is not a solution to the problem. It's a call for other to come and to share the problem, because, and this is socialism. This is socialism. This is the experience of socialism. We can share, we can solve problem collectively, not individually. This is the message. This is the message of the book. This is the message of the filmmaking, where what Žilnik did. He collects people around on the street, calls them to create a movie, outside of the big institutions, common people, because he believes they can do it. He believes, he trusts common people. This is socialism, that you think in equality not as some abstract, oh yes, Elon Musk and me, we have one vote, so it is democracy. We are equal. We are not equal. We all know that we are not equal. But there is this equality, which is a call for collective solution to the problems, for sharing experience, for creating better world together, not as individuals, each for his or herself. So the socialism is not simply, some. We can, of course, talk about it. What is market socialism, Yugoslavia? What is a market socialism? Well, then the simple, commonsensical knowledge on socialism in the West is, there is a state, and everything is the state, and poor individuals are, victims of a totalitarian state. And then you say in Yugoslavia, there was no state property. Not at all. They don't understand how comes there was no state property. Well, there was no state property. How the capitalism and democracy starts? With etatization. This is, it's completely different history. But this is also the experience of both socialism and communism. There is no such thing as historical communism. As a soldier in the Yugoslav People's Army, I was trained to protect the Yugoslav communism from the attack of the Soviet communism. Really, concretely. So it's complicated, but there is no, simple way out, especially in this world in which, we live in a concrete, realistic danger of nuclear Armageddon, which might this evening happen. We are, they even, most of this climate scientists today believe that it will be 2.5 or even 3 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial time, which is, it was 15 in Paris agreed 1.5. We are losing, our children won't have future at all. And these are problems we are facing and our book is facing. And I hope that our book contributes something, to help people and to invite them to do something to do something about this reality. Using camera, using my computer, writing of anything or video, or using it, but something that we can share, and then it's about survival now.
Yeah, and I do think we strike a tone of not necessarily optimism, but certainly not despair. That something about thinking about how we got here and how a past could be had, makes room for talking about how this present is not all lost, or that that collaboration rather than individualism might be a way to intervene in politics. It's sort of from New York, in the most recent past, all these student gatherings have been dispersed by the police. So that's not particularly optimistic. Like the conversation is getting canceled. But I think the book, to the extent that a book can have a life of its own and sort of do its work among readers, I think it's going to do good work. My feeling is that it has it's going to have good company.
The fact is that in Yugoslav socialism, even 1968, when police intervened against students, it did not enter the faculty, the university. They still believed it's sacred. But Berlin, I'm from Berlin. This happened also here.
Yeah.
So the police intervention on the area of university. Let's use this area. How this area has lost its meaning. A special meaning. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we actually mentioned some of the interesting spots of our subject. I mean, stepping on one level more regarding Oliveira's suggestions. After, I'm very glad of her intuition relating to the very first book, and when he jumped into it, and later on we actually, through this process, starting to discuss what could be possible elements and units, rising the whole issue to be more kind of gradually understandable, and through this actually we have kind of internal exchange process, what could be interesting to put into it. We also involved our friends of Memory of the World. So it's becoming a new volume, basically. So maybe Olivera would actually just refer of some of these spots, because just because of your very significant role trying to be kind of a specific medium, someone who is sitting in the States and understanding very much the context of from where is come up the whole material.
Medium as a psychic of an Anglo reader. Yeah, I suggested that we should have a timeline, in part because of the sense that I was getting from the book that it's telling us how to think about global history, let's say, as playing out in former Yugoslavia, and how the episode of socialist Yugoslavia is not something inexplicable and strange, but something that we could also see in the context of sort of world historic events. And that I had imagined the way it was eventually put in the book, that there's sort of two columns in the timeline, where one lists the relatively obscure events that happened in Yugoslavia, but that they sort of have reverberations or mirrors in world historic events, or that they sort of can be placed in the context of history of the world. And even while we were just finishing up the last draft of the timeline, France adopted, sort of speaking back to what Boris was saying earlier about the way that, for instance, women's rights look like something new and unprecedented. France inscribed abortion rights into the Constitution, and it was sort of advertised on all North American media, where there's a lot of concern about how abortion rights are sort of going away. That this is the first time that abortion rights are being constitutionally secured. And of course, then somebody intervened to say that a Yugoslav constitution of 1974 had abortion rights actually written in. So we added that as a World Historic Event. And the other, what was the other thing that I suggested?
Talking about the map and all this stuff.
Oh, the maps. Yeah, and the media landscape, yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Sasha Bošković was also saying how he was appreciating all this. And I thought this was, especially since this whole world of filmmaking and state investment, and Žilnik talks in these interviews very frequently and very sort of vividly about what it costs in terms of like social capital. What Boris was just saying about like knowing people, knowing who to call, knowing how many people you need at least to make a film, and actually getting it done. And people sometimes sell you things, sometimes loan you things, sometimes volunteer, sometimes expect to get paid, sometimes have to eat, so they have to get paid. And that the argument that Boris also mentions in the book about sort of the collapse of socialism is sort of the complete annihilation of all the cultural life and sort of social networks and ideas about what state and infrastructure have to do with the production of art and the ability of anyone to sort of plug into the world of art making. So I thought we should at least mention all the production houses and all the papers, magazines, journals that are mentioned in conversation. And I thought that was a good way to sort of bring to life the variety of this activity, the variety of people, the variety of languages even, and the map of the world and all the, I thought it was interesting that Zhilnik mentions not just the cities in which these film production houses are located, which sort of makes sense because these are political centers and that's where all the money goes. But that he mentioned all these people who become very prominent makers of film, producers of culture who come from some small towns that nobody's ever heard of. I don't even know where half of those places are. So I thought we should put those on the map too, because there was a lot of migration in that country, and that the migration, kind of like for my parents, was very speedy and very like enormous changes were happening in a generation or two. So that like I am where I am, and I had illiterate grandmothers, and Dusha Makaveyev is living in a circus wagon, and whoever else is washing his face in wash basin. That it's kind of an interesting world in which like it doesn't matter how you live. It's sort of sounds like New York in the 1970s and 80s. That being an artist was possible in part because you didn't have to be afraid for your life, like the physical existence, that people had ideas and had sort of the spirit to make them happen. So I thought that should be on a map, and that the map should show where this country was and how close to all sorts of other things it was that now feel like, or are supposed to feel like they were always very, very far away and in time and space.
Yeah.
Just to add something,
Come on.
I was actually in the 80s, I became a member of the so-called community of artists in Croatia, which meant as a journalist, translator, author, which meant that I got paid the healthcare and the retirement.
Yeah.
I got paid.
Yeah.
Just speaking of why there were so many bands and then cultural life. Well, being an artist meant, okay, you don't have to think about your health and about your future and retirement. This is covered. Concentrate on art. If you earn something good, if you don't, you can live in a circus wagon.
Yeah. Go make things if you feel like it. Yeah.
Right. But just to
so,
add, what you mentioned now, then including the map and timeline, it's actually just organically jump into this ecosystem of everyone who was involved in the process. As Boris already mentioned, then when you put this one, it actually comes up as another brick in the whole sharing process. Then Dejan Kršić, as a designer of the book, he is actually fully loved in timelines and producing many different structures in a very significant frameworks in Croatian production recently, and he was really like to explore and to work on it. So basically, I think then all our friends who's actually involved in the circle, they really fully support the idea and also the memory of the world, and they actually give up the whole books visibly and to support the content. So in that terms, I would say then we just have kind of a strong commitment, and the sharing process was fully name it.
If I may conclude, I would say this book is also a collective product, and then we were we have been constantly emphasizing this, but this is this book. You mentioned design, different ideas, visuality. You know, this is a filmmaker, an interview. Someone else recorded these interviews, which was Hito, and there were so many people did the book, and it is collective product, and I'm very, very proud to be part of the project.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, very glad to having you in this conversation, and see you soon, very, very soon.
Okay, you are promising.
Yes.
We'll hold you to it.